Well, hello everybody. Welcome into this Adobe Photoshop tutorial brought to you as always by tutvid.com. Flat design is a thing and it's out there in the world and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. It seems to be being this trend, if you will. I don't know. I hate to use the term trend with just anything. Flat design seems to be too beautiful to just be a trend. But it is being refined and tweaked, and it's kind of growing and flourishing, and it's a living thing. So we're going to take a look in this tutorial at 10 techniques that every graphic designer ought to know that particularly pertain to flat design. That's what we're going to take a look at. Now, if you do enjoy this tutorial, make sure you hit the little like button over there. Subscribe to my channel so you never miss another graphic design or Photoshop or photography, Lightroom, video editing, Illustrator, any of that stuff tutorial, all the good stuff that we cover in this channel. And if you really love this tutorial and you're looking to support what we're doing here at tutvid.com, getting ready to move into a new studio space, and I'm so excited about it. I can't wait. You guys are absolutely going to love it. It's going to be sweet. And I don't just use that about I don't just use that word about anything, I should say. If you're looking to support what we're doing here, this is what I'm trying to say. Go ahead and pick up a copy of my Photoshop course. It's all about how to retouch images in Photoshop, but it does cover a lot of different techniques and things that you can do in Photoshop that you may just find interesting. And as I said before, it's just a great way to support what we're doing here at tutvid.com. If you pick up a copy, hey, thank you so much. If not, no worries. I still love you the same. And guess what? This video, totally free. Let's check it out. 10 different techniques that pertain to flat design that I think every designer ought to know. We're actually going to walk through the process of creating this little mock-up, and it's going to carry us through in as elegant and graceful a manner as I can these 10 different techniques. So, of course, we're going to begin by going File, New, and just create a new fresh document, which we'll work with. 2560 by 1440 is great. It's kind of the file size that I lean toward just as a default when I'm just messing around in Photoshop these days. And I think we should kick things off by just jumping over here to Google Chrome and talking about the number one thing, and that is finding a color scheme. Now, I'm partially colorblind, at least so I've been told, and these websites that help you find and build color themes are so amazing. The first one I want to share with you is coolors.co, COOLORS.co. All you do is choose Start the Generator. It's free. And you can see up is going to pop a bunch of stripes of colors. Hit the space bar and it gives you a new assortment of colors. And if you find a color like, wow, this dark slate gray is sweet, go ahead and hit the lock icon. There I am using the word sweet again. I said I don't use it about just anything. And this mountain meadow green, we really like that. So we lock in those two colors and then just the center colors change. And the thought is that the artificial intelligence here that Coolors possesses will always give you some kind of beautiful color scheme, and it's just up to you to kind of choose the colors. Ooh, we really love this red Pantone, and then it's just a matter of locking in and honing in the last couple colors, and boom, you can download this color by just going to export, and export as whatever you like. Honestly, I tend to go PNG and just right-click, copy the image, and paste it into Photoshop so I can sample whatever I want. But maybe your workflow is different. The other, and the method that we're going to use today is my good friends at Adobe have an amazing little tool called Adobe Color, color.adobe.com. You can go there, you can explore, you can tweak color themes, you can save color themes. Really, the goodness is to be found here under Explore, where you can check out the beautiful themes that all the good people have put together all across the Adobe ecosystem. And boy, there's some amazing stuff. Cherry Cheesecake, Honey Pot, Aspirin C, Seawolf, all these are just so good. And, you know, right now it's being sorted by most popular, but you could do most appreciations, all these different things. You could just go with random themes. Or you can use the search bar. So if we're looking for something that's specific to UI, let's say, we could see what we have here. And there's a bunch of replicated ones, but there's a bunch of, you know, dark UI, flat UI, all sorts of things. In fact, maybe we'll just roll with a flat UI or something like that. Let's go with like flat UI here, and we'll go info here. And there's a number of ways you can download the color. You could save it to your library. You could do all sorts of different things. Honestly, what I usually like to do is take a screenshot, which again is just going to copy this to my clipboard. So I'll go ahead on the Mac and use the hotkey that I've specified to create a screenshot, but not save it to my desktop. Instead, copy it to my clipboard. See, voila, I copied to my clipboard. Command or Control V, and there you go. Just like that, I'd have it in Photoshop. I can right-click on it, convert it to a smart object, and then Command or Control T, hold down Shift, and I would just scale it down and drag it up and just snap it up into like a top corner, something like that. And then my color scheme is always with me. I can just name the layer colors, and voila, I now have decided on a color scheme for this particular project. And now with colors out of the way, the number 2 thing that I think is really interesting is finding subtle textures and patterns that you can use. Let's jump back over to Chrome, and over here, toptool.com/designer/subtle patterns. I'll make sure I put a link to this in the description to this video. But if you just run a Google search for subtle patterns, you're going to find this site, and there are just some amazing free patterns. In fact, right here, look at this topography. This looks so sweet. I think this is what I want to roll with. You can hit the preview button, and it gives you an instant preview there in the background. Let's go ahead and download this one to keep things simple, right? I'm going to minimize my Chrome screen. I'll open up my Finder here, and there it is, topography.zip on the desktop. I'll double click on it. And there we go. We've got this topography folder. I'm going to click and I'm going to drag this into my flat design folder there. And I'll open up this folder and I can see we have this .png file. Now I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to choose to open it. Oh, I'm going to right click again. Choose to open it with Photoshop. There we go. It opened right up. You can see it's kind of a difficult to see pattern, but we'll work with that. All we need to do with this PNG is go Edit, Define Pattern, and we'll call this. Yeah, we'll just call it topography, just like that. Hit OK, and we can close that PNG. Great. Now what we'll do is come down here and select this little half white, half black circle, and we'll choose patterns. So we're creating a solid pattern layer. And you can see we'll just go with our most recently created pattern. It's this topography pattern. I think I'm going to scale it up a little bit. Maybe we'll take it to like 175, make it a little bit bigger, make it a little bit more noticeable. Go ahead and hit OK. And before we do anything else, I'm going to shut the pattern layer off because we're going to throw a solid color fill layer beneath this. So I'm going to choose that little half white, half black circle and choose solid color. And here in the solid color picker, I'm just going to choose the darkest sort of bluish purple color there as our background. Go ahead and hit OK. Now I'm going to turn that pattern back on. And what we want to do is drop away all the white. And we just want to leave the lines. So I could select that pattern fill layer and I could set it something like multiply, which would do just that. The problem is I actually want those lines to be white. So we really would need to say screen, but the problem is with screen, we're going to keep all the white. So here's what we need to do. With a pattern fill layer, we want to right click on it and choose Convert to Smart Object. Now that it's a smart object, we can go Image, Adjustments, Invert. And you'll be able to see here if I open up and by hitting that little arrow, open up the sort of the smart object, we can see we have an invert there. It's a non-destructive edit we've performed. And now we can take this layer and set it to the blend mode of screen, and we can just see all those white lines. We may, in fact, want to reduce the opacity here a little bit. Maybe take it down to like 50, 60%, something like that. That looks quite a bit better. We can name this pattern fill layer just topography or something like that. So guys, I want to jump in here real quick and interrupt you and remind you that if you're interested in supporting the channel, make sure you pick up a copy of my course. Again, all about how to retouch images in Photoshop. If you like Photoshop, if you like what you see here on the channel, I think you're going to love that course. If you're not into retouching images, I do also have an advanced Photoshop course, which is just a conglomeration. It's like 9 hours of material. I'll make sure I include a link to that right here as well. So maybe if you're not interested in the retouching thing, maybe you'll be interested in some of that. Definitely more geared toward the graphic designers, if you will. Again, use the link up there, and let's get back to this video. Great. And next up, and this is number three of our flat design techniques that every designer should know, shape layers. So over here, if you use any of these shape tools, and we'll go with the rounded rectangle tool here, you have the option to create a shape layer. These are such incredibly useful tools, or such an incredibly useful feature, I should say, in Photoshop, that it's really something you ought to know about. We're just going to click a single time here, and we're going to choose to create a rounded rectangle of a very specific size. We're going to go 650 pixels wide by 1000 pixels tall, and we're going to set the radius of all corners to 20 pixels. We're going to go 20 pixels across the board. I'm going to hit OK, and you can see it creates this almost smartphone shape. And now what I'm going to do is hit Command or Control A to load everything as a selection. I'm going to come up here and grab my Move tool, and we're going to use our alignment features here to align to the horizontal and vertical centers, and Command or Control D to deselect. I think what we'll do is we will select the fill of this shape here, over here in the Properties panel, and we'll choose, you know what, let's choose the little color picker here by hitting the little multicolored thumbnail, and let's just sample from our color scheme. Let's go with the very lightest gray, hit OK, and there we go. We've got the very lightest gray filling in our rounded rectangle base. Next, and the fourth technique, is drawing simple shapes with the shape tools. In this case, we're going to create that calendar icon, right? It's actually not that difficult to do. We're going to begin here. We're going to grab the regular rectangle tool, and I'm going to click once, and we're going to create a rectangle that is 250 pixels across by like just less than that high. So let's go 250 by 230 or so. All right, something like that looks good. Let's just move it out here. We'll create our rectangle out here. Let's zoom in on it a little bit. We're going to create a second rectangle here, but what I want to do is come up here to my control bar, and this option right here, this sort of regular square, we want to change this to subtract front shape area. So I'm going to do that. Well, I'm going to undo. What we'll do here, we'll begin by drawing a new shape. So you can see it holds that path operation of subtract front shape, but let's pretend we don't know that. Let's just go with new layer here, and I'm going to draw a new layer shape. And when I have that shape drawn, what we would do is we would select both of these layers over here in the layer panel. So I got the top rectangle, hold down shift, select the bottom rectangle, hit command or control E. It's going to merge both of those shape layers together. And then what we would do is using the path selection tool here, we would select just the inner rectangle, not the outer rectangle. So now we got the outer rectangle selected. We don't want that. Just the inner rectangle. And we can change this option now after the fact, subtract front shape. And you can see it's going to punch a hole here in our sort of base calendar shape. And the next step is going to be hit Command or Control T to free transform just this inner path. And we're going to pretty radically change the shape of this little inner circle. We're going to punch a pretty decent sized hole there in the middle of our larger square. Go ahead and hit the check icon. And now we need to align both of these shapes. So let's just drag a selection over both paths. And we'll choose this alignment option right in here, and we'll choose align the horizontal centers. It's going to say, look, we're going to turn this into a live shape, or this live shape, excuse me, into a regular path. Yep, we want to continue with that. And then what I'll do is I'll grab the inner path again, and I'm going to hold down my shift key and just nudge downward with my arrow keys until it looks like kind of the bottom, the width of the bottom is about the same as the width of the sides. I might need to nudge that upward a couple clicks, just something like that. It looks pretty cool. So we've got the base of our calendar now. It's all aligned. It's looking good. Now comes the part where we create sort of little binder clips from which the calendar would, sort of be hanging, if you will. We're going to do this using the rounded rectangle tool. So I'm going to choose rounded rectangle, and we're going to click once, and I'm going to go with a width of 25 pixels and a height of 75 pixels. And the radius, we'll just go huge. We'll just go 50 on all corners. It's going to be too big, and that's fine. We want it to be a perfect pill shape, just like that. Now, under view, I have snapping turned on, and snap to layers and document bounds is one of the things that's turned on. Now you can see here this new pill shape is up on its own new layer, and that's fine. We're going to click and drag this pill shape over. I think I'm going to align it just with the edge of my little rectangle. In fact, I'm going to give it just sort of like a bright red color just so I can see exactly where it is. I'm going to drag it downward a little bit. Maybe something like that. That's cool. Hold down the Alt or Option key and click and drag, and you're going to drag out a copy. Hold down the Shift key to constrain it to a perfect straight line with our original sort of cutout, but it's not a cutout yet. And then we're going to hold down Shift and hit the left arrow key to nudge backward 1, 2, maybe 3 clicks. And we'll do the same thing here with the original rounded rectangle, this guy over here. We're going to nudge that to the right 1, 2, 3 clicks, just like that. Very cool. Now what we'll do is merge both of these shapes together. So Shift and select both of the rounded rectangles, just these sort of pill shapes in our layers panel, Command or Control E. And we'll try a different way to kind of combine these. Let's grab our path selection tool here. Let's select these. Let's hit Command or Control X and select the rectangle 2 layer here and hit Command or Control V. Look at that. It just pastes them right into that layer. We didn't really even have to do that whole merge down thing, although we could have. What we're going to do here now is set these 2 shapes. That's all we have selected. Let's try setting it to subtract front shape area. Look at that. And we just get this nice little chopped out area right there, right where we need it to be. Now we need to create some new rounded rectangles. So grab the rounded rectangle tool. We're going to click again, and we're going to set the size of this rounded rectangle to 15 wide by 40 tall. And again, 50 pixels for the radius is fine. Go ahead and hit OK. And you can see here we have this fine little piece that's going to slide right into where it should be. Great. Hold down the Alt or Option key and the Shift key and just drag right over so we get our calendar nicely exactly where it should be. Hold down Shift. We have that top layer selected. Select the bottom layer, Command or Control E, and we've merged them all together. So now we have all of our shapes here on one simple shape layer. The advantage of this is I can just double click on the shape layer and we can change the color of the whole thing as we wish. I'm not going to change the color quite yet though. I am, however, looking at this inner cutout, and I think I need to make it a little smaller. So I'm just going to select that path, Command or Control T. I'm going to, first of all, push it downward just a little bit, and then hold down Shift and Alt. That'll be Shift and Option. And I'm just going to tick it inward just a little bit. Doesn't have to go in like crazy. Something like that I think looks a lot better. Now what I think we'll do is grab the text tool, and we're going to place some Helvetica, and I'm just going to put like a number 15. This would be, in theory, the day that they sign up or whatever. And over here in my text character panel, by the way, that's window character, we're going to try setting the size of our font here to, I don't know, let's go like 120 points. That looks pretty big. I'm going to select color, and we're going to sample that same gray so we can actually see our letters. There we go. Cool. And I'm going to drag this 15 over, and I think I'll just kind of like manually align it there in the middle of my calendar. I think that looks pretty good. And for now, we'll just leave our calendar there. We'll come back to that in just a second because I want to move on to the fifth thing that I think you really ought to know if you're going to be into flat design, and that is subtle strokes and subtle shadows. Let's throw a subtle stroke and shadow around our original rounded rectangle, this guy here. We're going to do that by going layer, layer style, and we have both a stroke and a drop shadow. Let's begin with the stroke, though. Stroke is nice and simple, right? We're going to come in here, first and foremost, choose the fill type of our stroke to be a color, and we'll stick with the color black. I'm going to make the stroke more like 2 pixels. Maybe we could make it 3. Make it whatever you want. You just definitely want it to be noticeable. Now, we can't see it because our blend mode is set here to overlay. You see that overlay? So I'm going to set it to normal, and immediately we can see our little border. 3 pixels is probably fine. Maybe we'll make it a little smaller at 2, and just reduce the opacity of the overall border, down to like 45, 50, just kind of until it's just blending nicely there on the edge of the rounded rectangle. It's meant to be more of like a, subtle subconscious thing than something that's loud and proud in your face. I'm just going to hit the drop shadow here, and we're going to add a rather large drop shadow. We'll go with a distance of like 120 pixels and maybe a size of 200 pixels. I'm going to change the angle to a regular 90 degrees. That means it's going to project down here beneath this rounded rectangle somewhere. I'm going to make the color of the drop shadow. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sample the dark purpley blue here in the background and just make it a bit darker than that. Go ahead and hit OK. And we can't really see it here, so we'll just boost the opacity up. And you can see if I put it at 100%, we can really see it. But again, subtlety is key, so we'll knock it down to like 30, 40%, something like that. You can see there's before, there's after. So it's meant to be just kind of floated in there, and it looks pretty nice. We'll go ahead and hit OK for that. And now this next thing is pretty cool. I'm going to select the rounded rectangle here. Let's just give it a color. Let's colorize it with this kind of like, reddish color here. I'm going to just use my eyedropper tool. I sampled that red and hit Option Delete. That'd be Alt Backspace, and I have that rounded rectangle layer selected. Select the 15 layer, same thing, Alt Backspace, Option Delete on the Mac. Great. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm just going to grab my Move tool, and we'll move this calendar down here. I don't want to line the calendar up yet because we're going to talk about that in just a second when we get to all the layout features. But moving along to feature or technique number 6, let's talk about speckles of simple shapes. And I think this is important because this is something that a lot of cool designs and things you're going to see nowadays have. In fact, the very intro to my tutorials at this very point in time, at least, has sort of this burst of speckles shapes and colors and things bursting out of my logo in the very intro to the video. Here's how we create something like that. First of all, over here we have the shape tools. We want to choose the custom shape tool. And before you go any further, you might not have all these custom shapes. Well, all you got to do is select this little flyout menu up here and make sure that you've loaded all custom shapes. Something else we can do is make sure we view the large thumbnail so you can really get a good look at what's going on here. And I think I want to begin with sort of the thick donut shape here. So we'll begin with that, and I'm going to set the fill. Let's set the fill right off the bat. Let's choose our color picker here, and let's go with maybe the bright blue for the donut shape, right? And what I can do is just click a single time and make this a 10 by 10 pixel custom shape. All right, you can see there it is, floating out there. Now we can just hold down our Alt or Option key and just duplicate this a bunch of times. So we can just throw a number of these shapes wherever we want. We can be generous with it. We can just say, you know what, oof, not too many of them. We know we're going to be throwing some other shapes out here. Or we could just really go hog wild with it and put lots and lots of shapes out here. So it's really up to you. Whatever you think looks cool, whatever you think is going to be best. I kind of dig that. That looks neat. Maybe what I'm going to do is I'll take my colors and I'll move them down here to the bottom corner because that's kind of where they can sit without getting in the way of anything. And you can see I have all of these shapes that we just created, right? All these shape layers here. These are all donut shapes. Well, in order to keep things kind of contained, let's just select the bottom shape, hold down Shift, select the top shape, hit Command or Control E, and let's call this, circles or something. Just whatever is gonna, whatever identifies that to you. If I can spell circles correctly, there we go. And you can just shut it off, turn it on. The other cool thing about this is you could Command or Control T to free transform these, make them bigger, smaller, stretch them out, move them around very easily. Or because it's a shape layer, you could use your eyedropper tool and you could just simply select another color like the red, and with that layer selected, Option Delete or Alt Backspace, backspace and you change the color of all of that particular shape. So that's pretty cool. Let's add another type of shape though, custom shape tool. Let's go with, do we have a triangle in here? Yeah, there we go. There's a triangle. That looks pretty cool. I think I'll go with the straight triangle, solid triangle that is. I'm just going to select ones. Let's go with like a 15 pixel by 15 pixel triangle. There we go. And let's change the fill from that blue. Let's choose this like aqua, green color. That's pretty cool. Grab my move tool once more. And we'll put a few less of these triangles just because they are pretty big, right? But we want to make sure that they're kind of fairly represented here amongst all of our different shapes. There we go. Something like that is pretty cool. Once more, we can select all of these shapes, Command or Control E, and then just say triangles. All right, and we should probably add one more shape. So let's go to the shape tools. I think I'm going to look for a diamond. There's a diamond right there. That's pretty cool. I think I'll go with, let's go with the 10 pixel by 10 pixel diamond. Something like that should be neat. And the diamond, I think we will make, well, the diamond might work as the gray color because it's a diamond after all, but I think I'm going to keep things interesting and go with the more red color because that's just what I prefer. And then I'm going to hold down Alt or Option, and I'm going to drag the diamond wherever I want the diamond to be. So we'll put a bunch of diamonds in here. And, it's the same song and dance. We're just going through, spreading it out, making it look like it belongs. Try to make it as sort of, random as possible, if you will. There we go, something like that. Hold down Shift, select your bottom diamond, Command or Control E, and we'll name this diamonds. There we go. So we've created sort of our little speckle of shapes. You could even group these up by, Shift and selecting the bottom layer, hit Command or Control G, and we can call this speckles of shapes or whatever. And we've got our nice speckly shapes. So now let's move along to number 7 in the list of 10 flat design techniques that every designer ought to know. And this is working with layout tools and just generally how you're going to lay things out in Photoshop. Number 1, like I mentioned, you probably want to turn snapping on. It can be really helpful, especially when you're working in an environment like this where you have a lot of sharp edges and things can kind of click together and just, kind of sit themselves in beautifully. But first and foremost, we want to align our calendar. So in order to do that, we want to group these assets together so we can align them as one sort of family. So I'm going to select the number 15 and select the rounded rectangle. Let me actually show you what happens if I don't group them. So let's select both of these, hit Command or Control A to select the whole document, or you know what, better yet, let's Command or Control click our rounded rectangle because ultimately we want to center this calendar in the middle of this rounded rectangle. Let's say, all right, center it that way. Great, there we go. Let's center it here on the horizontal, and you can see the 15 slid way up because Photoshop is aligning these as individual elements, not as one bulk grouped element. So what I'm going to do is with both layers selected, hit Command or Control G, and I'll just name this group a calendar icon or whatever, and then Command or Control click on the rounded rectangle, and then we can go ahead and align that however we want. In fact, I'm going to drag this up the card and place it more like there. And by the way, I did that by just clicking and dragging with the Move tool and holding the Shift key, and then boom, drop it right where it kind of looks right. Next up, what I want to do is grab the text tool, and we'll type out the word confirmed and a period, and I'm going to hit the little check icon. I want to color this almost the same color as the background, so I can just select the color thumbnail there and choose that darkest purpley blue on my color scheme. There we go. And I want to change the size probably down to like 72 points. That's probably about right. And now with the text, I have it center aligned. This way, when I Command or Control click on my rounded rectangle, I can just go ahead and grab my Move tool here and align it to the horizontal centers there, right? That would be the horizontal center, and it's going to align just perfectly right there as it should. Now, what I'm doing is I can move it all the way up so it's touching the calendar, but I think I want to move it down off the calendar. And if you hold down the Shift key and nudge any direction with the arrow keys, it's going to nudge it 10 pixels. So I can nudge it downward 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, and I know that that's right around 100 pixels off the bottom of the calendar. In fact, if I take my rectangular marquee tool and I just do like a rough measurement, look at that. Look at the height. Can you see the height count? 100 pixels exactly. So that's pretty stinking cool. We got that 100 pixels off the calendar, and it was just a couple little clicks. Now, next what I think we'll do is set up a series of guides to just give ourselves a little, 20 or 40 pixel margin here on this rounded rectangle. So let's Command or Control click the rounded rectangle. Now, remember, this is going to be particularly easy for us here because under View, we have snapping turned on. We're going to choose rulers to show the rulers. And what I'm going to do is click and drag in the top corner area. I'm going to click and drag, and I'm going to allow it to click to my selection. Just like that. Now, if I zoom in on this, we can see that sort of the top point of our, sort of the top missing point, if you will, where the straight pointy point of the rectangle would be, that is 0 by 0. So that's sort of our 0 point. So what I can do here is I can click and drag in a ruler and say, you know what, I want a 40 pixel, roughly 40 pixel margin on my little card here, my sort of fake badge that's appearing. So I can drag in and just get it to about 40. I'm not going to be too precise here. We can get it to 40. Now we can see here that's 650, so 40 I'm going to be about 610. Where's 610? There it is. And now I'll move down to the bottom, and we'll do the same thing where we check and see where the bottom is, 1,000 pixels exactly. So what would 40 less than that be? 960. Where's 960? There, well, we got 960.2. That's close enough for my liking. Very cool. Hit Command or Control D to deselect it. Command or Control R to hide the rulers. And you can see we have this nice little area in which we can work. And now with the text tool, we can drag out, and because we have snapping turned on, it's going to snap to these guides. We can drag out a nice little text field here. And I probably want to change the size of the text. We'll make it like 24 points. That's probably fine. Let's just call this placeholder. And I'm going to hit enter, or I'm sorry, command return. That would be control enter on the PC, because I'm actually going to jump over here to my original badge, and I'm going to grab this chunk of text that I have here and just copy that and bring it over here. And let's double click on our placeholder and just paste that in. And I'm going to commit that change. So we can see we've got our calendar confirmed, and then a block of center aligned text beneath that, but really it's just stuck within those guides because we dragged the text field instead of just clicking a single time and creating, line type. Now what we can do is select both of these text layers and just reduce the opacity. We could take them down to like 60%. You can see it makes it just a nice gray. We're still using that same color from the background. That's cool. And I think what we should also do is comprised in some flat designs, and I'm just remembering it here looking, is gradients. So let's create just a thin gradient strip. With both of these layers selected, let's nudge these down another 100 pixels. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Cool. And in fact, confirmed, I might nudge down like 1, 2, 3, 4 more times, right? So something like this, 240 pixels off of the 15. That looks cool. And what we'll do is we will grab our line tool, and I'll just draw a shape. In fact, maybe I'll just, I'll draw the shape here. Between, I have the line tool. We don't want the line tool. What am I thinking? We want the rectangle tool. Did I say line tool? We want to drag the rectangle here, a very thin rectangle between both of our guidelines. We can zoom in just to make sure it's lined up the way we want it to be lined up. That's good. That's good. Looks cool. And what I'll do is I'll drag this now, so it's kind of in between these two icons. If I want to get it exact, I can grab my rectangular marquee tool, drag a selection, just like that. And then with that rectangle selected, you can see I still have that thin rectangle selected. Go to my move tool right up there, and then align it to the vertical center, just like that. Command or Control D to deselect. And now it's just a matter of creating a simple gradient out of our current existing colors. So what I'll do is I will select my rectangle, I'll open up my properties panel, and I'll probably move the properties panel over here so we can sample from these gradients. Open up the fill color selector and choose the gradient. And then here what I can do, I can just throw any gradient into it for the time being, but then I'll just click on the gradient stripe here, and it's going to open the normal gradient editor that you would expect in Photoshop. And we'll throw in, I don't know, maybe like 2 or 3 different color stops. Let's throw in a couple color stops just like that. And I'll double click on this orange here, and let's go with the sort of pinkish coral red color. What do we do there? Let's go with sort of the coral red color. Hit OK. Let's double click on this stop. Let's go with our light gray. And you can see it's really packing that gradient in. Don't worry, we're going to change the way it flows in just a second. Let's go with the blue. And then on the far side, let's go with kind of that aqua seafoam green. Hit OK. And what we need to do is change the angle of the gradient to 0 degrees. And you can see there it is, just like that. Looks good. And then we can just drag our properties panel back over here. So, creating gradients, super simple. Whoop, drop the properties panel. Not where I wanted it. There we go. That's a little bit better. Creating gradients, super simple. Maybe the line's a little bit too thick. If that's the case, go back to your either shape tool or path selection tool. And you can see the height is 13. Let's have that. Let's take it to like 6. And you can see that looks pretty good, just like that. And you know what? Honestly, maybe even that's too big. Maybe something like 4 is more like what I'm looking for. There we go. Something like that. That's cool. And you can just, make sure it's aligned and looking good and everything like that in there. Maybe I'll nudge it downward just a couple clicks, and we can go view, show, and hide the guides. And you can see there's our badge as it stands right now, but we still have some more things to do. Let's talk about the 8th thing, and that is flat shadows. They're all over the place in designs like this. Once more, I'm going to take my colors and I'm going to move them over here to the bottom left corner now of my document, because we're going to create a flat shadow that comes out from behind this badge. Despite the fact that we threw a drop shadow on it, let's just try to ignore that for a second for the sake of checking this out. We'll grab our base shape, this rounded rectangle, and hit Command or Control J to duplicate it. Select the bottom version of the shape, right-click, and choose to clear the layer style. Clearing the layer style is just going to get rid of the drop shadow, get rid of the stroke, just return it to that original shape that we created and we loved so much. With that shape selected, now we hit Command or Control T. And now hold down Shift and just rotate that shape probably, 45 degrees. That's probably great. And what I want to do now is extend that shape all the way up to the top edge like that, and then all the way down here to the bottom corner, right? And then we're going to pull the shape out this way. So that's going to be our shadow running way off over there. Go ahead and commit that change, and you can see there's the basic shape of our flat shadow. Now, to make this really work, obviously, let's just fill it with black, or what we could do even is fill it, if we grab our eyedropper tool, we could fill it with sort of this dark purpley color, but make it even, just a little bit darker. Kind of just something like that. Go ahead and hit OK. It's our foreground color, but we have that rounded rectangle, that angled rounded rectangle layer selected. So Option Delete on the Mac, Alt Backspace on the PC. That'll fill that with your foreground color. And what I want to do now is grab my original path selection tool and select the original this original rounded rectangle path, Command or Control C. Now come down to our new rounded rectangle. We can even hide our original rounded rectangle temporarily. Hit Command or Control V to paste it in place, and we're going to set this shape to subtract front shape area, right? Now we need to transform this path real quick, Command or Control T, and we'll pull the path up, right? And we're just looking to knock out all the shadowy bits that don't belong. Commit that change. We can turn our original rounded rectangle back on. We can deselect all those shape layers, and there is our flat shadow. Now, at this point, we can select that rounded rectangle, and we can just reduce the opacity until it, kind of looks like it belongs. What will that be? About 30%, something like that? Let's just select any old layer, and you can see, just like that, we've created our very cool flat shadow that extends right off of the document. It's such an easy way to create a nice and simple flat shadow. And now we're up to the 9th thing, and that is gradients with transparency, and using them to create our own subtle texture, maybe that can run behind the calendar. Let's check out how to do this. Let's come down here just above the topography layer and choose our rounded rectangle tool. I'm going to click a single time, and we're going to make a rounded rectangle that's 1,000 by 1,000 pixels, and maybe set the corners to like 35 pixels. We want them to be relatively rounded, but nothing obscene. Go ahead and hit OK. You'll see we get this nice big blue rounded rectangle with beautifully rounded corners here. What I want to do is rotate this almost to make it like a mountain peak. So hit Command or Control T and hold down Shift and just rotate it on a 45-degree angle, just like that. Commit that change. And you know what? All the stuff in the foreground is kind of distracting. So I'm going to select all of these layers except my colors layer, and I'm going to hit Command and the comma key. That would be Control comma. It's going to shut those layers off, so that it just hides them temporarily. Let's work on this new pattern shape here. This is going to be pretty cool. If we open up our Properties panel here, we're going to make sure we have that shape layer selected, and you can see that we're just getting essentially what is a mask, and that's because when we rotate the shape, it kind of messes with the shape layer a little bit. In order to change the fill, we want to go to our path selection tool here, and you can see we get all the normal stuff that we expect. Go up to the fill. We're going to choose to fill this with a gradient. Now I'm going to select this gradient stripe, and what we're going to do is we're going to change both color stops to this dark purpley color, but I'm going to come in here to the brightness, and I'm going to push the brightness up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe like 6%. So we're going to take the brightness to 44%. So it's going to be the color of our background, but just a little bit brighter. I'm going to do the same exact thing to this white color stop here. So I'm going to take it up to 44% on the brightness. Go ahead and hit OK. Now we're going to take this top color stop. We're going to select that. It's actually, as you can see, a Photoshop telling me it's not a color stop. It's an opacity stop. When I select that, you can see I've got opacity options. So let's reduce the opacity here to 0. And you can see, if I hit OK here, I have a gradient that runs from the bottom to the top, solid color, to absolutely nothing. I want to change this to an angle of -90 to put my color at the top and fade down to nothing. Now, as I look at this, it looks like there's just kind of too much, like the color is extending down into the shape a little bit too much. If I just deselect that shape altogether, there's too much of my rounded rectangle showing. It doesn't look like a mountain. So I'm going to select that rounded rectangle again, and I'm going to go back to my fill. I'm going to select my gradient stripe again, and I'm going to slide my opacity slider all the way over to like 30%, I want to say. I'm going to push it way over. Go ahead and hit OK, and you can see now when I deselect that shape, it just looks like a little faded mountain peak in there. Looks really, really cool. Now we want to add a stroke to this. So let's go Layer, Layer Style, Stroke. And this is going to be kind of an important stroke because this also needs to have a gradient that fades to nothing here. So we're going to go Fill Type Gradient, and you can see here this is actually perfect. If I open this up, we have almost the same exact gradient, except both color stops are white. And here, the opacity stop, we've dragged it over. Let's just take it to 30% like we have with our gradient. So the opacity stop at 0%, but dragged over to the 30% location, which is right there. It's 30% from, this is 0%, right? 30%, this would be 100% over here. And both color stops are white. So go ahead and hit OK, and you can see what it looks like up there. It just looks like we have that sort of white stroke now floating up there and fading to nothingness. I do want to reduce the size to 1 pixel just to make it a little bit more subtle, a little smaller. We could probably boost the opacity to like 85%. And here we'll try. Remember before it was on the blend mode of overlay? Let's try that again. That actually looks really cool because it's going to allow us to take some of that blue background color. That's neat. I dig it. And a scale of anywhere between 70 and 100% will probably work for you. I've got the linear gradient, angle of -90. All this stuff down here looks great. And it just, if you need to pause the video here to take a look at exactly what kind of gradient I have, absolutely feel free. That all looks really, really good. Now I think before we hit OK, let's throw a drop shadow behind this so like the top of the mountain is casting a little bit of a drop shadow sort of up that way. So let's go add a drop shadow. And you can see how, because it's using the same drop shadow that we just used on our rounded rectangle shape, we've got this huge soft drop shadow underneath. We don't really want that. We can retain that same dark blue color, that's fine, but we want to go with an angle of -90, so it's pushing the drop shadow up past the top of our shape, right? We're going to go with a distance here of like, I don't know, 80 pixels and probably a size something like 100, not too far. That looks pretty good. And I think we want to reduce the opacity here pretty drastically. Let's take it down to 10 or 11. That's pretty nice. And then we should probably throw some noise into here. That's just going to keep our shadow from looking like it's getting any banding. So we're going to throw some noise in there. And this is also an important option here too. Layer knocks out drop shadow. If we tick that off, it's going to try to apply a faded drop shadow behind all of our transparent areas. See how that's like all dark now? That is no good. So we want to make sure layer knocks out drop shadow is turned on. So we can hit OK here, and we have our basic triangle. What we can do now with this triangle is go ahead and duplicate it a number of times. Hold down Alt or Option, and we can just go ahead and duplicate this, throw it into here. We can duplicate it again. Command or Control T, we can make it a little bit smaller if we want. Right, so we can take a little tiny baby triangle and put that in here. And we can take these clusters of triangles, right? So I've got these 3 triangles. I can duplicate this whole bit, maybe up over to here, something like that. I can duplicate it again. I'm just holding down my Alt or Option key and dragging. I have these 3 layers selected. I can hit Command or Control T. I can make this really big, right? So I can make this part of it huge down here. And maybe I can hold down Alt or Option and drag a copy of these huge mountains up here, something like that. Whatever. You can just have some fun with it, mess around with it until it looks good, until it looks like you want it to look. And something like that is kind of neat. Maybe I'll shift it over just a little bit. Maybe I'll shift it back the other way. I don't know. I don't quite know 100% what I want, but that all looks pretty good. At this point, we could select the top rounded rectangle, hold down Shift, select the bottom rounded rectangle, hit Command or Control E, not Command or Control E, I'm sorry, Command or Control G to merge them together, and we'll call this triangles, not really pattern, it's more like a texture. So let's go texture, and we'll shut off the topography layer just to get rid of that because it's kind of distracting at this point. And we should probably add some noise and maybe some additional lighting above this. So here's kind of a cool trick. If we choose to create a new layer, but we hold down the Alt or Option key, we're going to get the new layer dialog box. Let's call this layer grain. It's not over yet though. Go to mode and choose the blend mode right off the bat of soft light. And look at this. Photoshop will say, hey, look, you chose soft light. Would you like to go ahead and fill this layer with a soft light neutral color, or something like 50% gray? To which we'll answer, absolutely yes. Hit OK. And look what this does. It gives us a layer already set to soft light and filled with gray, which is just waiting for us to add grain. So now we can go like filter, camera raw filter. we can use the effects tab in the camera raw editor, this guy right here, and we can just add a bunch of grain, right? Something like that. We can, change the size, change the roughness, whatever we want, get the perfect grain, hit OK, and it's just going to apply that grain. We don't see any of the gray. We can go ahead and reduce the opacity as we see fit. And just get a nice blending grain in there so our background looks like it has some natural texture and it's not just pure digital artwork. It's going to make it look much more tacit. Let's go ahead here and create a new layer beneath the grain layer to add some lighting effects. I'm going to double click on this layer. I'm going to name it Lights, and I want to fill this layer with white. Now if white's not your foreground, you can hit the letter D. It's going to reset your colors to the default black and white, and then hit the letter X to swap the foreground and background, therefore making white your foreground color, and use the hotkey Option Delete Alt Backspace on the PC to fill that layer with white. Now we're going to go Filter, Render, Lighting Effects. And when we do this, you'll see we get this nice spotlight effect, and you can play around with this and make it as spotlighty or not lighty as you want. I think I'm going to go with something just like that, kind of a spotlight coming in from the top right corner. If I zoom out, Command minus or Control minus, you can see that you've got all these different options in terms of making the spotlight bigger, smaller. You can grab any part of it and stretch it and twirl it and spin it and do all kinds of things. Very intuitive. Play around with it. Get exactly the look you want. Maybe you want a spotlight that looks like it's coming straight down. Hey, nothing wrong with that. I'm going to go with this angle, though. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm going to set this layer to the blend mode of, let's try color dodge. That might interact with the colored background a little bit better. Yeah, that's pretty cool. And we'll just reduce the fill opacity, right? We'll just reduce it until it's about right, whatever right is, just something that looks kind of like it belongs. And now what we'll do is we'll turn all of our other layers back on. So I'm going to select that bottom rounded rectangle, my flat shadow, hold down Shift, go all the way up to the speckles of shapes, Command or Control and the comma key. There we go, look at that. We can shut our colors off now. And at this point we can do like one final pass of colorizing, maybe just as a presentation piece. If you're working from actual, for the actual color scheme, you probably don't want to do this step. But in this case, I'm just doing this for, I want to make it look a little more poppy, contrasty, colorful for presentation purposes. What we'll do is add a color balance adjustment here, and we want to sort of increase the cyans, maybe increase the green a little bit and increase the blue, something like that looks cool. We'll go to the shadows here, and if we pump too much yellow into the shadows, it looks kind of bad. Yeah, let's go blue in the shadows. Let's go some magenta in the shadows. What is cyan versus red in the shadows? I kind of like red in the shadows there. That looks cool. And then we'll go to the highlights. We'll push some yellow into the highlights. This is going to almost give a slight yellow, faded, weathered look to our badge. I kind of dig that. Adding a little bit of green will do the same thing. I kind of like adding a little green, and let's see what the difference between adding some cyan and red. Yeah, let's add a little cyan to our highlights, something like that. So you can see before color balance, after color balance, it just helps all the colors pop a little bit. Maybe you hate it, maybe you don't, I don't know. You can do whatever you like with it. If we don't want it to affect our card here in the middle, that's easy. Hold down Command or Control and select the thumbnail for that rounded rectangle layer right down there. See, it loads it as a selection. Make sure you're selecting that color balance layer mask. I know that I'm selecting it because I have those little white sort of notches around it. And then just simply use the hotkey Command or Control I to fill it with black, Command or Control D to deselect. And there we go. We're now affecting everything except the stuff on the card in the middle. So that was the ninth thing, gradients with transparency, and we kind of got taken away playing with all the grain and the lights and everything like that. But that's the beauty. I don't know. I like doing that kind of stuff where it's, we don't have to be so, stuck up and worried about everything that we're doing. We kind of just have some fun when we're doing this. So let's roll right into the 10th and final step that I think any flat designer should know, or any graphic designer that wants to dabble in flat design should know, and that is exporting assets and exporting Retina graphics. So if we're to the point where we want to export this stuff, we can select the layers that we want to export, like this, maybe the rectangle, the calendar icon, the rounded rectangle, the shadow here, maybe the speckles or shapes, we have that layer group, that's cool. And maybe the triangles textures on the bottom, right? And we can just right click and choose export as here, right? You see that, export as. And when we do this, we're going to get our export as dialog box, which is a beautiful thing here in Photoshop. Let's give it a second to just kind of populate and bring the stuff in here and do its thing. And we have some options. Let me just see if I can crunch this box down a little bit. There we go, something like that. First and foremost, with the speckles of shapes, you can see all the files files over here, by the way. With the speckles of shapes, we probably don't want this to be a JPEG, so we can change the format to a PNG, right? We want to preserve that transparency. And if we need to resize or change the size of the image right here on export, we can do that. For instance, if the developer says, look, that speckly graphic can be no more than 1680 graphics wide, or 1680 pixels wide, excuse me. Voila, there you go. I'm going to undo that. You can change the canvas size as well. That'll just kind of like scale the edge inward or outward if you need to change that. And you have some other options in terms of embedding metadata and converting to sRGB and stuff like that. You can go and play with that stuff. And of course, you can choose to tick on or off the transparency, but we're exporting this as a PNG primarily so we can get that transparency. Here, the rectangle, this can be a JPEG. We can set the quality to whatever we like. You know, something around 70 is usually just fine. If I can get a handle here on the slider. There we go. Something around 70 is usually just fine. It's going to save you some file size, but not make you compromise on your quality. Calendar icon, same thing. This can probably be a JPEG if we know the colors are all going to be the same, but maybe in this day and age, we should just make it a PNG and just give it that transparency. So when you're coding in the color of the rounded rectangle behind it, you don't worry about your graphic not having a correct background color or being slightly off, or if the client decides they wants to change it for, you know, who knows what. Your graphics will all just kind of float on top of them. Also, by the way, a graphic like this will probably, especially in today's web environment, end up being SVG, not PNG, but, you know, hang with me for the sake of this this little example. The rounded rectangle, again, if you were to export an image like this, which you probably never would do, this would all be created out of CSS. The stroke, the everything, shadow could all be done with CSS. But if you would, you probably would want to make sure you preserve that transparency. Same thing here with the shadow, but again, we would go with a PNG so we keep that transparency and things are looking good. Without transparency, the triangle texture looks really bad, so let's try exporting that as a PNG. That still doesn't look all that great. The export as is not really being too friendly with our blend modes. Oh, hey, you know what? There we go. You can see it just updated a little bit. Or I just noticed it update a little bit, and that looks a little bit better. Remember, we're seeing it without that dark blue background, so presumably this would be going into a web environment or a user interface environment where there would be a background color set, something like this purpley color that we had as our background, and it would look great. Now, any of these graphics that needed to be Retina graphics, like maybe the calendar icon, this rectangle, we can select multiple graphics at the same time, and we have this scale all option. We can hit the little plus icon to add a second version of the graphic that's exported. We could do half size. We could do a 2x. Right, and it's going to give it that suffix. We could, for some of the bigger, you know, iPhone 7 Plus and Android phones, you can go with a 3x graphic as well. So this will not only export your 1x graphic, but it'll also do a double size and a triple size, which you can obviously then media query till the cows come home and have fun with. So you can export all of your you can export all of your Retina graphics here from Photoshop. You can export some PNGs, some JPEGs. You even have your GIF and SVG options here in export as, right? I should have touched on the SVG option, right? But you know, we're not gonna get into SVG. That would have to be an entire tutorial unto itself touching on SVG. But you have multiple file formats. That's the point. Here in the export as dialog box that you can use, a simple click export all. You choose where you want to place them or save them on your hard drive. Voila, it's going to export them, and you are going to be good to go. And that, my friends, is it for this one. We've covered 10 different techniques that I think every flat design interested or flat design inclined graphic designer ought to think about. Obviously, for when you're using Photoshop, you know, for a bunch of the design stuff you're going to be doing, you'll be using a program like Illustrator or other vector drawing applications that are out there that are really great and really awesome, and I love a lot as well. Again, if you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure you go ahead and hit the little like button down there. Subscribe to my channel so you never miss any videos in the future. And for 10 different techniques for a graphic designer who likes flat design, wants to design flat design stuff, and is just all about that flat design life, that's it. Get it, got it, good. Nathaniel Dodson, tutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.